On the night of Wednesday, May 27th, 2020, BLM supporters held what they would call a racial justice protest in quotes, at a Target store near the 3rd Precinct Police Station in Minneapolis. And after they completely ransacked the Target, the mob began surrounding the police station itself. Everyone in the city knew what was about to happen. Either the authorities would defend the police station or they would let it burn. At 6:23 p.m., the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, received an urgent phone call from the chief of police. He preferred to defend the police station, not let it burn. And he told Frey that because the riot was now so out of control and so large that the National Guard would have to come in to defend the police station. So 5 minutes later, the mayor's spokesman texted several other employees in the mayor's office. He wrote, quote, "Mayor just came out and said the chief wants him to call in the National Guard for help at 3rd Precinct. Mayor appears intent on doing so." Frey's policy director quickly added, "He called the governor just now." Now, that was a reference to the governor of Minneapolis, Tim Walsh, who was the only one in the state with the authority to deploy the National Guard. Frey passed along the police chief's message, and before midnight, Frey made his own explicit request to Walsh for the deployment of the National Guard. Now, keep in mind, Frey's about as far left as they come. He's the kind of mayor who doesn't resist a single opportunity to pander on the basis of identity politics. He would go on a few days later to performatively weep while kneeling at George Floyd's golden casket, if you remember. But in this case, letting a police station burn was too much. Even for him, it was too much. Yet Walsh refused to grant Frey's request. As the mayor's spokesperson texted later in the evening, quote, "Walsh was hesitating." Now, around 11 a.m. the next morning, as reported by the Star Tribune, Frey's office put their request for the National Guard in writing, citing injuries to first responders as well as, quote, "widespread looting and arson." Frey wrote that, quote, "The ongoing situation is well beyond the capability of our police and fire departments to respond." But Walsh hesitated once again. His daughter, a left-wing activist, posted on social media that the National Guard has not been deployed, which emboldened the rioters further. By the time the governor finally activated the National Guard at 2:30 p.m., the police station had already been evacuated, and rioters stormed in and lit the building on fire. Now, the police precinct was the most prominent of the 164 arson attacks that took place in Minneapolis from May 27th to May 30th of 2020. As Tim Walsh kept the National Guard away from the city, rioters used Molotov cocktails to indiscriminately torch small businesses, cars, police cars, government buildings. All this has been public knowledge for a while now. Walsh himself has called his response to the riots an abject failure, which they were, and that's an understatement, but that doesn't explain why he let Minneapolis burn for several days. For years, Walsh's defenders have argued that the situation at the police station was somehow ambiguous or that he was somehow unaware of what was happening all over Minneapolis, even though it was being broadcast live on national television and we all knew what was happening. But there's another explanation that actually makes sense, and it's that Walsh, like so many other left-wing elites, welcomed the violence. He wanted Minneapolis and the rest of the country to burn. At a deeply personal level, he enjoyed all the death and destruction. That was certainly the view of the First Lady of Minnesota, Gwen Walsh. We know that because she admitted it. In an interview, Gwen Walsh says that she kept her windows open as long as possible during the riots so that she could savor the smell of the burning tires. It was a profound moment for her because no one was burning down anything that she owned, so she rather enjoyed what was happening. She has bodyguards to prevent that sort of thing for her, so only the plebes suffered. And as they suffered, Gwen Walsh did everything she could and enjoyed it. She did everything but pull out a fiddle while it was happening. Watch.
I would say those first days, when there were riots, I could smell the burning tires. And that was a very real thing. And I kept the windows open for as long as I could because I felt like that was such a touchstone of what was happening.
Now, she didn't call her husband and ask him why he was allowing arson in the street outside her window. She didn't display any concern for the people who were losing their businesses and their livelihoods. Instead, she went with the single most psychotic option available, which was to revel in the suffering and destruction of other people. And apparently, the media was fine with this response. There was no national outcry after this interview. When Melania Trump wore a lighthearted jacket during the fake kids in cages controversy, it was a 5-day news cycle. Imagine if she had done something like this. Imagine if she said that she rolled down her window so she could take in the sounds of all the migrant children crying. That's effectively what happened here. And we know Tim Walz endorsed this settlement for a couple of reasons. It's not just that he stalled the deployment of the National Guard or that he never came out and condemned his wife's comments. Walsh came out and said directly that the riots were a justifiable reaction to America's failure to fully embrace the principles of DEI. So all those businesses had it coming, basically. The people who died during the riots, they had it coming too, I guess. The tens of millions of dollars of property damage in Minnesota was all worth it, according to Tim Walz. Watch.
A society that does not put equity and inclusion at the center of it is certainly going to eventually come to the places where we're at. This is a moment of inflection. It's a moment of real change. It's a moment that those folks who are out there demanding this are not going to take a commission or a report. They're going to want fundamental change. And that is what I think that's one of the exciting things in the midst of all this. You can feel a sense of optimism coming back.
A society that does not put equity and inclusion first will come to this result. In other words, if you don't fully support DEI, the government will allow mobs to destroy your business and maybe kill you, and you'll deserve whatever happens to you. Are you still struggling with back taxes or unfiled returns? The IRS is escalating collections by adding 20,000 new agents and sending millions of demand letters. Handling this alone can be a huge mistake and cost you thousands of dollars. In these challenging times, your best offense is with Tax Network USA. With over 14 years of experience, the experts at Tax Network USA have saved clients millions in back taxes. Regardless of the size of your tax issue, their expertise is your advantage. Tax Network USA offers 3 key services: protection, compliance, and settlement. Upon signing up, Tax Network USA will immediately contact the IRS to secure a protection order, ensuring that aggressive collection activities such as garnishments, levies, or property seizures are halted. If you haven't filed in a while, if you need amended returns, or if you're missing records, Tax Network USA's expert tax preparers will update all of your filings to eliminate the risk of IRS enforcement. Then they'll create a settlement strategy to reduce or eliminate your tax debt. The IRS is the largest collection agency in the world, and now that tax season is over, collection season has begun. Tax Network USA can even help with state tax issues. For a complimentary consultation, call today at 1-800-958-1000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Walsh. That's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Walsh today. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. Get the help you need with Tax Network USA. Now, yesterday, when I talked about the riots in the UK, I made the point that leaders who fail to enforce the law, say by opening the borders, shouldn't be surprised when lawlessness eventually breaks out. And, it doesn't make lawlessness good, but it does make it understandable in that context, and it makes it inevitable, most importantly. But what Tim Walz is saying is very different. He's saying that leaders should embrace lawlessness and destruction as a means of compelling people to support his party's agenda. He doesn't regret the violence. He wants more of it. Terror can be an effective motivator in the voting booth. Now, keep in mind, Tim Walz said all this while Derek Chauvin was supposedly, supposed to be receiving a fair trial in his state. The jury knew very well that unless they found some reason to convict Chauvin, the city would burn again. This is how things are done in Minneapolis. And by picking Tim Walz over a more moderate option, comparatively like Josh Shapiro, Kamala Harris has signaled very clearly that she wants the Minneapolis model of governance to go nationwide. This is a model where voters are instructed to endorse Democrats' ideology or, they'll lose everything. That includes potentially their children. Last year, Walsh signed a law that encourages children to flee from their parents in order to obtain puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and genital surgeries. The law also allows the state to use these procedures as a means to remove children from the custody of their parents. Quote, this is from the National Review. Tim Walz signed a bill in April 2023 that made his state a sanctuary for child sex changes, promoting tourism for such radical medical interventions in defiance of states that restrict them. Dubbed the Trans Refuge Bill by supporters, the law grants legal protection to children who travel to Minnesota for so-called gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers, reconstructive genital surgery, and hormone therapy, as well as the medical practitioners who provide it. The law makes seeking gender transition procedures for minors a factor in some assessments for whether a Minnesota court has jurisdiction to make an initial determination in child custody cases. This kind of law is so extreme that even California Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill last year which would have required custody courts to consider whether parents are affirming their gender delusions of their children. But Tim Walz has no problem with tearing apart families on this basis. In fact, he wants these broken families to come to Minnesota. Now, in my documentary, What is a Woman?, I spoke to a Canadian father who lost custody of his child after a hospital began administering cross-sex hormones to his daughter without his consent. At the time, it seemed like, a story you would only hear in Canada. Well, Tim Walz now wants to make that the reality in all 50 states. Now, because projection is the Democrats' platform at this point, Tim Walz will still accuse conservatives of hating freedom while he works to rip children away from their parents. This is from his big announcement rally yesterday in Pennsylvania. Watch.
I see those old white guys. Some of us are old enough to remember when it was Republicans who were talking about freedom. It turns out now what they meant was the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. In Minnesota, we respect our neighbors and their personal choices that they make. Even if we wouldn't make the same choice for ourselves, there's a golden rule. Mind your own damn business.
What Walz is counting on is that no one in media will ask him an adversarial question in the next 3 months. That's really the only explanation for this. He's hoping he'll get the same treatment from the press as Kamala Harris. And, that's probably a pretty safe assumption at this point. There's nothing about Walz's tenure as governor that suggests, even remotely, that he would allow people to mind their own business about anything. During COVID, Walz established a Soviet-style stay-at-home hotline to allow people to snitch on their neighbors for violating his lockdown rules. Hundreds of people called in to report that they saw people who weren't standing 6 feet apart or who kept their mask off at a restaurant even though they weren't mid-bite. Here's one of the complaints that was emailed in. Quote, "Good morning. I don't feel people are being compliant with the stay-at-home order. At the convenience store in White Bear Lake, and in-store traffic is the same. Customers are coming and saying, I'm bored and need to get out of the house. They buy lottery tickets, a candy bar, a soda, etc. Those items are not essential. And the traffic flow is the same as it was a month ago. The stay-at-home order is not being followed. It needs to be stricter." Now, this is the kind of antisocial behavior that Tim Walz encouraged just a few years ago in Minnesota. He didn't want to send rioters to jail, but he did want to encourage people to rat on their neighbors so they face hefty fines, potentially a jail sentence for, going to the gas station, God forbid, to get some items, and doing all this on a basis that has no scientific credibility whatsoever. And now he's going to lecture conservatives about freedom because he's betting that facts don't matter anymore. His base wants to hear lies and distortions, so that's what he'll deliver. And these are not subtle lies and distortions. At the same rally, Walz invoked the J.D. Vance couch meme, which is based on a fake passage from J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, that was uploaded by a random Twitter user a few weeks ago. This is now an attack line that Walz used at his rally, a fabricated page from somebody on the internet that has no basis in reality, and the base loved it. Watch.
And I got to tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy. That is, if he's willing to get off the couch and show up. So.
Now, after watching that clip and the other ones that I've showed, there's not really any point in going into any further detail about Walz's policies or life story. Yes, he says he's proud of his role in passing Obamacare, which has tripled the average family's health insurance premium. Yes, the very first executive order that Tim Walz signed created something called a DEI council that would address the problem of whiteness. Yes, he was in the military, at least until he abandoned his unit before they deployed to Iraq. Yes, he wants to give illegals a ladder to climb the border wall, and then he wants to give them driver's licenses when they're here. He also supports abortion until the moment of birth, supports putting tampons in the boys' bathroom at school. Oh, and he thinks that one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness, as he put it. But it's not even necessary to go into detail about any of that because they're all exactly what you would expect from a stock far left-wing politician. More to the point, Kamala Harris didn't select Tim Walz to govern anything. She selected him because she thought he'd help to win the election. And she did that because of the belief, pushed by Kamala Harris yesterday and by the media as well, that Walz is a down-to-earth, blue-collar guy because he knows how to fix a car, likes to hunt. And this is maybe the most flagrant misrepresentation of all. Like, blue-collar people are not impressed with that stuff. I mean, that's just because you can hunt and you can fix your car. No blue-collar, working-class American is seeing that and is just fainting with excitement because they relate to it so much. And we know that because it's obvious to anyone who's grown up around working-class families or anyone who's turned on a television since 2016, Donald Trump is about as non-blue-collar as it gets. He probably hasn't driven a car in 40 years, much less fixed one. He wouldn't know how to hunt a deer if his life depended on it, but blue-collar voters love him. And that's because Donald Trump projects an image of somebody who loves his country and cares about Americans. Walz, on the other hand, let his middle-class communities burn while his wife enjoyed the smell from the window of their mansion. And this is a contrast that Kamala Harris has embraced. And if there are still a critical mass of voters in this country who still want to live in America instead of burning it down, it's a decision that will cost Kamala Harris the White House in November, or at least it should. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.